Government was funding gay men to run explicit erotic campaigns about anal sex workers to reform practices within illegal brothels, and the supply of clean needles for injecting illegal addictive drugs. However discreetly carried out they were, these adventurous policies had one public face, and it was Neil Blewett's.
It's a killer disease. And what are the government doing about it? Nothing. They let these strange gays and poofters have Mardi Gras and processions.
That's the attitude of a lot of these so-called gays and poofters. They don't care who they give it to.
We're ignorant about sex.
Yes, we're ignorant because the government doesn't lay it on the line.
I don't want to pretend that we haven't got a serious public health problem developing in relation to AIDS in Australia. However, we don't want to exaggerate it.
I was worried all the way through because the shadow executive had its share of people who would listen to argument, but it had its share of people who came from fixed positions too.
Rumours of Blewett's sexuality began to simmer.
I was never personally concerned about them because I didn't think that a couple of brief affairs 30 years before were likely to surface in the 1980s.
Bill Botel's instincts told him otherwise. If the rumours hit the mainstream media, they had the potential not just to sink Blewett, but to take the whole AIDS response down with him. Botel got busy.
The worst people in this are hypocrites. The people you know get up to no good, might see prostitutes, might be have a boyfriend, might have done drugs in their youth, or certainly have members of their family who are doing all of those sorts of things. In a place like Canberra and Parliament in Australia, you get to know who's doing what to whom. And from time to time, it's incumbent to go to some of those people quietly and say, listen, you might be saying this out there, but many other people know something more about you than you seem to want to let on in public. And you should really consider the consequences of doing this. And I'm happy to say a lot of people understood the force of that argument in the end.
This couldn't hold forever. The controversial response to AIDS that Blewett and Botel had patched together could too easily flip into a political mud wrestle.
There had to be a national strategy, it had to last for a long time, and it had to be properly funded. And to do that, we had to get the support of the Australian public.
It wouldn't be easy to win support for a government policy run by poofters, junkies and whores from a public who already had their ideas about AIDS settled.
What do you know about AIDS?
I think that it kills you, and that it's usually transmitted by fags.
And who were so certain they couldn't catch it.
I just don't think I could because I don't really mix with people. I suppose I've got my own friends and I know what they're all like, and I just,
Yeah, so what the heck, I want to live, I want to live my life to the max.
But the emerging patterns from Africa suggested the future shape of AIDS, an overwhelmingly heterosexual disease.
The disease apparently was not spread as easily by heterosexual transmission, but once it got a foothold in the heterosexual community, then we would face significant problems.
AIDS had to become everybody's problem. The campaign to sell that idea was overseen by the former tabloid editor, Ita Buttrose.
We needed to shock Australians out of their apathy.
It was fought over frame by frame and line by line, but we didn't back down.
I knew what sort of impact it would have on Australia.
At first, only gays and IV drug users were being killed by AIDS. But now we know every one of us could be devastated by it. The fact is, over 50,000 men, women and children now carry the AIDS virus. That in 3 years, nearly 2,000 of us will be dead.
For 5 years, the government had urged calm and resisted language that would inflame fear or prejudice.
It could kill more.
The Grim Reaper turned all that on its head. Across the country, People were shocked by its gothic imagery of death and its flat promise of an apocalypse.
If you have sex, have just one safe partner, or always use condoms. Always.
It offended just about everyone.
Misrepresented the facts. That the fact, as we understood it from the evidence that we had, was that the whole community was not equally at risk.
I'd much rather have that attack than be slow to react now and have lots of heterosexual cases in 10 years' time.
Some people say that they read it as actually attacking gay men, that the Grim Reaper was homosexuals in some way.
I had no problem with people being offended by it, no problem with people debating it, no problem with people being even outraged by it.
10-pin bowling people were very unhappy. They came to me to protest that it was bad for business.
Shock, horror, complaints, praise, concern, counselling services were jammed. It worked beautifully.
Undoubtedly, this helped in our political efforts, both to get money and to mainstream the disease, making it going to be much harder for my colleagues to resist putting money into AIDS.
From a position where we knew nothing about AIDS in 1983, by 1987 we had developed what you might call an Australian model. The Australian model is prevention. And in 1987, that model, as it had evolved in this country, was funded permanently.
What happened was they put the homosexuals in charge of the programs. They should have just put health officials in charge of the programs, not people who have a vested interest.
Most of the radical policies Fred Nile fought against became permanent features of life in Sydney. Their new safe sex practices helped even the brothels to become legalised. The long-feared epidemic of HIV among sex workers never happened.
There has not in the last 25 years been a single confirmed or even strongly suspected case of transmission from a female sex worker to a man inside Australia.
And we have become the great safe sex advocates and educators to the broader community.
The Commonwealth Department of Health measured that 25,000 new HIV infections were prevented by the needle exchange programs.
Now we give out over 32 million needles and syringes a year in Australia from that little beginning in 1986.
Yeah, it did save my life. I had been sharing needles. Having needles on tap was a very good thing for me.
In Australia, around 1% of intravenous drug users are HIV positive. In the US, where needle exchange is rare, the figure is 20%. The general incidence of AIDS is 10 times what it is here.
If I have any regrets, it's that I didn't start even earlier and push even harder.
Only a few years after the first diagnosis, infections amongst Sydney's gay men began to decline. One of the swiftest responses in the world. But it would be another decade before effective treatments arrived.
The peak of AIDS deaths wasn't reached until 1994. So horrible as it was in 82 to 87, and we'd all begun to lose friends, the fact of the matter is there was a lot more tears and grief to come.
I never thought in the end it would come and affect me so personally. I think I was in denial about that. It's a very strange thing. You just never believe that it would come home and hit you so hard.
In the late 80s, Botel's lover was hospitalised with AIDS.
And it was the culmination of this 4 years of being involved in this thing. And the end result of it, from my point of view, was, yeah, well, the policies were pretty right, and a lot of things, good things happened in one sense, but the thing that happened to me was he died. He died. He died on his 30th birthday.